The date is Friday, September 12, 2008. It is 6 p.m. on Wall Street. And inside the glass towers of one of the most powerful financial institutions ever built, a group of men in expensive suits are beginning to realize that they might not survive the weekend. This is not a metaphor. This is not an exaggeration. In exactly 48 hours, Lehman Brothers, a firm that had survived the Civil War, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and every financial crisis in between, would be dead. And the men running it were about to spend the most desperate, humiliating, and catastrophic weekend of their lives begging every powerful person they knew to save them. Every single one would say no. What happened inside those walls during those 48 hours changed the global economy forever. It triggered a financial collapse that destroyed $10 trillion in household wealth, wiped out retirement accounts, and cost millions of people their homes, their jobs, and their savings. And it all came down to a single weekend, a handful of phone calls, and one man who refused to write a check. Let us go back to the beginning, because to understand how Lehman died, you need to understand just how untouchable they believed they were. Lehman Brothers was founded in 1850 by 3 brothers from Bavaria who started by trading cotton in Alabama. 158 years later, it had grown into the 4th largest investment bank in the United States, with over 25,000 employees, offices across the globe, and assets measured in the hundreds of billions. It had outlasted empires. It had financed railroads, rescued municipalities, and helped build the modern American economy brick by brick. The men who ran it believed, with absolute conviction, that it was too big, too important, and too deeply woven into the financial system to ever be allowed to fail. That belief was about to kill them. The crisis had been building for months. Lehman had made enormous bets on the American real estate market, loading up on mortgage-backed securities and commercial real estate at exactly the wrong moment. When the housing market began to crack in 2007, those bets started turning toxic. By the summer of 2008, the losses were staggering. Confidence was evaporating. The stock had been in free fall. And the rumors circulating through Wall Street were no longer rumors. They were warnings. But Lehman CEO, Dick Fuld, refused to believe the end was near. Fuld was known as the Gorilla on Wall Street, a nickname he had earned through decades of aggressive, almost savage deal-making. He had run Lehman for 14 years and had survived every crisis thrown at him by sheer force of will. He believed he would survive this one too. He was wrong. By the first week of September 2008, it was clear that Lehman needed either a buyer or a massive injection of fresh capital, and it needed it fast. The firm had been in talks with potential investors, including the Korea Development Bank, but those talks had collapsed. The window was closing. And that is when the phone calls started going to Washington. On Thursday, September 11, Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson received a call from Fuld. Fuld explained the situation. He needed help. He needed the government to step in, the way they had stepped in 6 months earlier when Bear Stearns was collapsing. In March of 2008, the Federal Reserve had provided crucial backing to help JP Morgan Chase absorb Bear Stearns, preventing an uncontrolled implosion. Fuld wanted the same deal. He wanted a lifeline. What he got was a cold, clear, and devastating message. The government would not be providing financial backing for a Lehman rescue. There would be no bailout. If Lehman was going to survive, the private sector would have to save it. This was the moment the clock started ticking. On Friday evening, Paulson called together the chief executives of every major Wall Street bank and told them to come to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York the following morning. This was not a request. He was essentially conscripting the most powerful financiers in America and telling them they had a weekend to solve a problem that could bring down the entire global financial system if left unresolved. The men who showed up on that Saturday morning included the heads of Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan Chase, Merrill Lynch, Citigroup, and others. It was an extraordinary gathering, a financial war council convened under emergency conditions. And sitting somewhere on the other side of that equation, in Lehman's own offices, was Dick Fuld and his team, waiting to hear whether they had a future. Saturday, September 13, 2008. Two potential buyers had emerged. The first was Bank of America, one of the largest banks in the country. The second was Barclays, the British banking giant. Both had been conducting due diligence on Lehman, both were circling the wreckage, and both came to the same conclusion. Lehman's toxic assets were the problem. The losses buried inside those mortgage portfolios were so massive, so uncertain, and so potentially catastrophic that neither institution was willing to absorb them without some form of government guarantee or financial assistance to ring-fence the bad assets. This is where the negotiations began to collapse in real time. Bank of America's CEO, Ken Lewis, sat across from government officials and made the math plain. He was not buying a firm with that level of toxic exposure without protection. There had to be a public backstop. Paulson said no. There would be no public money. No guarantee. No backstop. The government had drawn a line, and they were not crossing it. Lewis walked away from Lehman. Within hours he was on the phone negotiating the emergency acquisition of Merrill Lynch instead, a deal that would be announced that same weekend. The irony was brutal. While Lehman was dying, another firm was being saved, just not by the government and not in the way anyone had anticipated. That left Barclays. The British bank's president, Bob Diamond, was genuinely interested. Barclays had been studying Lehman for months and saw real value underneath the toxic layers. The discussions were serious. At one point on Saturday evening, people inside the room believed a deal was actually possible. There was cautious, fragile, desperate optimism. For a few hours, it seemed like Lehman might actually make it. Then London called. Barclays could not complete the acquisition without shareholder approval under British regulatory rules. And getting shareholder approval over a weekend, for a deal of this size, in an emergency timeline, was not possible. The British financial regulator, the Financial Services Authority, would not waive the requirement. They were not going to allow a British bank to absorb potentially catastrophic American losses without proper shareholder consent. And there was a deeper issue. British regulators were genuinely alarmed that they were being asked to help clean up an American mess with no American money on the table. The FSA made their position clear. Without a financial guarantee from the US government to cover Lehman's most toxic assets, Barclays would not be permitted to proceed. Paulson called the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, Alastair Darling. The conversation was direct and, by most accounts, tense. Darling told Paulson that Britain was not going to import American problems. He was not going to allow UK regulators to wave through a deal that could expose a British institution to risks that American authorities themselves were unwilling to guarantee. Darling later described the call in stark terms. He had no intention of being the person who saved Wall Street by gambling with British taxpayers' money. The last door had closed. By Sunday morning, September 14th, it was over. The people inside those rooms at the New York Federal Reserve knew it. The Lehman executives knew it. And as the afternoon wore on, the final grim procedural work began. Lawyers started drafting bankruptcy documents. Executives who had spent their entire careers at the firm began calling their families. Security arrangements were being discussed for the following morning, when tens of thousands of employees would arrive at offices around the world and need to be told that the company they worked for no longer existed. At 1:45 a.m. on Monday, September 15, 2008, Lehman Brothers Holdings Incorporated filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It was the largest bankruptcy filing in American history. The firm listed $613 billion in debt. 158 years. Erased. When the markets opened that Monday morning, the reaction was immediate and savage. The Dow Jones fell 504 points in a single day, one of the largest single-day drops in history at that point. Credit markets froze. Banks stopped lending to each other because no one trusted anyone. The commercial paper market, which businesses use to fund day-to-day operations, began to seize up. The global financial system, already weakened, went into shock. Within days, the US government would do exactly what it refused to do for Lehman. It would inject $85 billion to rescue AIG. It would push through a $700 billion bailout package. It would backstop money market funds, guarantee bank debt, and intervene in markets on a scale not seen since the Great Depression. Everything Lehman had asked for and been denied, the government would provide for others within the same week. Whether the decision to let Lehman fail was a catastrophic miscalculation or a necessary moral line is a debate that economists and historians still have not resolved. Some argue that allowing Lehman to collapse created the panic that forced Congress to finally act. Others argue that the panic itself caused immeasurable and unnecessary suffering, that it wiped out the savings of ordinary people who had nothing to do with the reckless bets being made in those glass towers. What is not debatable is the human cost. 8 million Americans lost their jobs. Millions lost their homes. Retirement accounts were devastated. The crisis spread from Wall Street to Main Street to every corner of the global economy. Families in countries that had never heard of Lehman Brothers found themselves unable to pay their mortgages, unable to find work, unable to rebuild what they had lost. Dick Fuld was never charged with a crime. He kept a $350 million fortune accumulated during his years running the firm. The company he led into the ground was gone, but he was not. He resurfaced later in a smaller financial venture, far from the spotlight, far from the towers he once commanded. The Lehman Building on 7th Avenue in New York was eventually taken over by Barclays, the very bank that had walked away from saving it. The name Lehman Brothers disappeared from the world's financial vocabulary forever. One weekend. 2 potential buyers. Dozens of phone calls to the most powerful people on earth. And not a single person willing to write the check that might have changed everything. The most dangerous thing in finance is not a bad bet. It is absolute certainty that someone else will always clean up after you. If you want to understand how the modern financial world actually works, not the polished version you get in textbooks, but the raw, desperate, human version that plays out behind closed doors when billions of dollars and millions of lives hang in the balance, then this channel is where those stories get told. Subscribe, because the next story is just as dark, just as real, and just as important as this one.